Hello and welcome. You're watching The Full View here on SABC News Channel. We start this bulletin with a tribute to the Minister in the Presidency, Jackson Mthembu, who died today of COVID-19 related complications. The seasoned politician cut his teeth as a student in the 1970s. He served as a whip of parliament for the ANC and as well as a national spokesperson for the party. He served as MEC for transport in Mpumalanga from 1997 to 1999. Our condolences to his family and his colleague. Jackson Mthembu was 62. May his soul rest in peace. Well, straight to those headlines. As you can see, top story being this: Minister in the Presidency Jackson Mthembu dying from COVID-related complications. A Netcare 911 helicopter crashing in Bergville in western KwaZulu-Natal, killing 5 people on board. Public Protector Advocate Busisiwe Mkhwebane plans to challenge the 3 charges of perjury against him. More details on that later. Question of the day: what are your fond memories of the late Minister in the Presidency, Jackson Mthembu? I'm sure you may have seen from the video that we played earlier on. It certainly forms one of many for a lot of people, and very much depicting the character that he was, I would say. And if you want to add on to your memories, perhaps you want to share with us some very memorable incidents that were either public or not, please send those to #FullView. And of course, you can view any of our interviews and features by simply going to sabcnews.com. You'll also find us on Facebook and Twitter. Well, COVID-19 has claimed the life of Cabinet Minister Jackson Mthembu this morning. President Cyril Ramaphosa confirmed the sad news with a statement this afternoon. Minister in the Presidency Jackson Mthembu tested positive for the virus. On the 11th of January, the governing party says it's lost a principal leader who was loved by many. A week ago, the minister made an announcement. He had tested positive for COVID-19 after showing some symptoms. Mthembu was the face of government's communication to the public on matters related to the pandemic. The ANC has expressed shock and sadness at the news of Mthembu's death. Mthembu got involved in politics when the ANC was banned by the apartheid government. He rose through the ranks from being an activist, a legislator in the new dispensation, chief whip of the majority party, and recently a minister in the presidency. In a statement, President Ramaphosa says Mthembu was an exemplary leader, activist, and lifelong champion of freedom and democracy. Describing his passing as a great loss to the nation, the president conveyed his condolences to the minister's family, colleagues, and friends. And of course, to discuss this a little bit more, we're joined now by the ANC's Deputy Secretary General, Jesse Duarte. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much, and indeed condolences to you as well. Surprising news. I think it all caught us by surprise. I liked what you said earlier on, that this is proof that COVID is not playing. Why do you think that this particular loss has hit the country, hit us all so hard?
I think because Minister Mthembu was the face and the voice of the government on the issue of COVID, day after day, week after week, at every family meeting of the country, as well as every briefing that the ministers had to give updates on COVID. This was the man with the deep baritone voice and the wonderful smile that coordinated those gatherings. So the shock is, this is someone who deeply understood how bad COVID was and yet succumbed.
You mentioned that you have known him for a very long time. You're with him in the leadership interim group. What was the importance of that, and how did that cement your relationship?
Well, Comrade Jackson worked in what was known as the Eastern Transvaal. I worked in the PWD area. Our task before the unbanning of the ANC, as many would know, during the UDF times, was to make the country ungovernable. And then the ANC was unbanned in 1990, and our task was to form branches of the ANC and interact with civil society across the board. which we then did. And our primary task was to form ANC branches. Comrade Jackson was a formidable organizer. He could bring together people who disagreed with one another over many issues and yet find common ground. So he had a remarkable gift of ensuring that people were able to sit down and talk in a reasonable manner. Even if they disagreed with one another, they could still talk, you know. I think that was one of his gifts, yes.
One of the things that I found about him was his humanity, and I think a lot of the public were able to see that from him. He could be both reserved and gregarious, but I want to go back to the humanity aspect of it. He was part of the ANC Caster Semenya Support Committee, and that was very important work for him with regards to human rights in this country.
Comrade Jackson's belief in human rights goes back a long way. Remember that in what used to be the Eastern Transvaal, some of the most atrocious apartheid acts were committed. You might remember even way back before his time, things like slavery on the farms and so on. So he grew up in an area where human rights were frequently trampled upon and understood that one had to fight to get those back. So for Comrade Jackson, the issues around Kwashiorkor at the time, injustice, the role that the courts played. I recall him being very active in assisting us to criticize the role that the courts played, particularly the magistrates' courts, who never took anybody seriously. And black people's complaints were simply filed and not, in fact, really dealt with. So justice was an important issue for him. The notion of human rights and the rights of women and gender rights. And I think that you mentioned the issue, him supporting Caster Semenya. He would have done so because of the unfairness that was perpetrated against her as a human being by the international sports federations.
Just as a person, one of the things I admired about him also is what you see is what you got with Jackson Mthembu. I'll give you a moment to just cough there, Mr. Duarte, but if we can talk about his role in the NEC. He was a member of the NEC since 2007. And how his good judge of character was pivotal to him be part of that and the decisions that were taken.
Comrade Jackson in the NEC, as you said, what you saw was what you got. Very straightforward. Put things as they were for him. Didn't mind entertaining controversial issues. Spoke his mind very, very freely, didn't blanch away from being criticized and answering back. So he brought into the NEC a sense of one can speak your mind here, this is a safe place, we must be able to talk to each other. But what was very admirable about him was that he could also agree with consensus of views. So once he had put his view very strongly, and the House had come to a consensus, he would accept that consensus. He would not walk against it, but he wouldn't hesitate to put his view very strongly and argue against views that he disagreed with very strongly as well. So there was never any coyness about him. He was a man his character was one of being true to himself, very true to himself, I must say. You know, he wasn't afraid to apologize if he had made a mistake, but he would also criticize people who made mistakes and would not apologize. Yes. So you know, that was unique, I must say.
Thank you so much for speaking to us. And again, our condolences to you and your colleague, Jesse Duarte, the ANC's Deputy Secretary General. And indeed, I agree with you that he didn't hesitate to put you in his place. A consummate professional he was, because it was never personal. It was always about the job, the good of the people. And we'll continue speaking about the role that he played in democracy. After the unbanning of political parties in 1990, he was entrusted with the responsibility of leading the Witbank branch of the ANC between 1990 and 1994. He worked full-time as the ANC spokesman in Mpumalanga, and of course he participated as the ANC staff component in the CODESA negotiations. Of course, we'll speak to various comrades who were on the ground with him during that time. We'll also speak to those who were with him in ANC structures. Many a journalist paying tribute to him today about exactly that he, no matter how contentious the issue was, he will make sure that all are comfortable, gave a fair opportunity to everybody. And as Jesse Duarte was saying there, I think the reason that everybody has taken this so hard, that it's so hard to process, is precisely because he was the face of a government's communication strategy on COVID-19. So let's continue talking about Jackson Mthembu and the role that he played within the internal politics. So, as I mentioned, that he was also the staff component at the CODESA negotiations. Since the unbanning of the ANC in 1990, he served in several strategic roles, including as member of the ANC Mpumalanga Provincial Executive Committee. Joining me now is the Deputy Minister of Defence, Thabang Makwetla, who's also the former Premier of Mpumalanga. Very good evening to you, Deputy Minister, and thank you so much for speaking to us. Condolences to you and your colleagues as well. So just talking about his role as MEC in Mpumalanga, as the Provincial Public Works, Roads and Transport Minister. He served under you and former Premier Posa. Where did your journey in particular begin with him?
Well, Lisa, thank you very much for the opportunity, and to your viewers. Let me first say that I would imagine that indeed there is silence in many places in our communities this evening, especially in the province of Mpumalanga, as people are coming to terms with the demise suddenly of the minister in the presidency and former member of the NEC, Comrade Jackson Mthembu. I got to pick up the name Jackson Mthembu when I came across narratives of the efforts of the mass democratic movement to help SWAPO win the elections at the end of 1989, 1990, that led to the independence of Namibia, that he was one of those who mobilized together with NAFCOC Kumbis from South Africa to make transport available for SWAPO to take the voters to the voting stations. But of course, in later years, I was with him in the first caucus of the ANC in Parliament in 1994. He was in the NCOP, and always, of course, made an impression to many comrades who were in that caucus, because we were meeting for the first time from across the length and breadth of our...
Deputy Minister, allow me to interrupt you. I want to focus on your work in the NCOP with Mr. Mthembu. I know a lot of him know of his work in the National Assembly, the importance of that and how that played into strengthening our democratic agenda.
Comrade Jackson always made an impact, I must say, in every responsibility that he was assigned. And it was his work in the NCOP that actually made him a very relevant candidate for the leadership in our province of Mpumalanga, and he then got appointed as one of our MECs, the MEC for transport. The other day, I just across the story of protesters who have been at the union building for nights on end, demanding that the Moloto Road railed corridor must be embarked upon. That was the initiative started by Comrade Jackson when he was the MEC for Transport in our province. There was never an opportunity given to Jackson that he never made full impact out of in making his humble contribution to our transformation agenda.
I spoke about the fact that he also participated in the Condesa negotiations. I want to bring up the name of Solomon Mahlangu because he is very much prominent when we talk about the politics of Mpumalanga. And Jackson Mthembu himself was accused of sabotage, treason and terrorism. If you could talk about the nature of these two men and how it was reflected in those Condesa negotiations.
The involvement of Jackson in the Condesa negotiations can be talked to, I would imagine, by many leaders within the ANC who were closer to those processes. I was at the time not at the Mother Body's head office work. I was with the ANC Youth League head office. But let me just say this about Comrade Jackson and his, political career. He's one person who, for me, you can say that he was too humane to a fault for politics. He's one person who had the courage of his convictions. On every matter, he felt strongly about. You would be sure that he will stand by his word, and not only that, in action, at all costs, to make sure that his viewpoint, his perspective that he believes in, is carried through. But not only that, when Comrade Jackson, as I would imagine other speakers would have made this point, when Comrade Jackson has made a mistake, like a typical revolutionary, somebody who's serious about wanting to see change in society, you would go back and seek to correct that mistake with the same passion and humility. He was so transparent. He was so genuine in his endeavors that I always felt that he was just too humane for the environment in many cases where he found himself in. Thank
you so much for speaking to us. Deputy Minister of Defence Thabang Makwetla, who was also the former Premier of Mpumalanga, under which Jackson Mthembu served as MEC. We're going to take a quick break and more tributes for the former minister in the Presidency.
My
Find out from the Northwest Premier, Job Mokgoro, how he has taken this news. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us, Mr. Mokgoro. Many of his comrades have said two very important words, I think, honesty and loyalty, and I think the third one has been passion. In the past two interviews we've just had, it seems that the one thing that people seem to admire about him is his ability to say, I'm sorry, which is something a lot of people don't really do.
Indeed, and thanks very much for the opportunity. There are a number of good things that I recall about Minister Mthembu. As a communicator, whenever he speaks, you read a lot of honesty in what he says. You read a lot of assertiveness in what he says. You sense clarity in terms of content. And above all, every time he does so, you see respect oozing out of this man. He reminds me of some of the things that Warren Buffett said about selecting people who would work for him. He identified three characteristics: intelligence, energy, and integrity. And he said, if you have the first two and you don't have the third one, then forget, don't take that person. And integrity was also a centerpiece in Minister Mthembu. I have had the privilege and opportunity to work and interact quite a lot with him when we were preparing to govern during the old Shell House at ANC meeting. And one of the things, every time I went to a meeting, I knew that Minister Mthembu, then Comrade Mthembu, would be at the meeting. Amongst others, we're serving in the Department of Economic Policy, in the Department of Economic Development, and it was really quite a pleasure and privilege to serve with him. A very articulate man, and whenever he speaks, the content of what he says would always be capturing, inviting, as I said earlier, because amongst others, his clarity, honesty, and assertiveness. We will certainly miss him. He is a great loss, not only to his family, not only to government, but I think to South Africa and beyond.
I think a lot of South Africans, or probably the later generations particularly, would be more familiar with his work in the latter years, and we've been trying to talk a little bit more about his work in the grassroots, and he was very instrumental, I believe, in the founding of NUMSA and also supporting the UDF structures. Of those, what would you say were some of his most important projects?
I would really say it's important from a project, in my view, especially in the latter years, was his appointment in the presidency, as a minister in the presidency, because I really think he did a lot to enhance further the prominent, presence and image of the presidency. He's really done, remarkably well in his last post within government.
And the fact that he was always so a valiant fighter of the truth in the tumultuous time, a lot of people have been talking about that, and also people have admired the fact that he never shied away when there was adverse reporting against him, allegations against him. The strength of character that he showed, what can we learn, and even you as politicians going forward, for those qualities that he brought to politics, to politicking?
Well, if we look back 2 weeks ago, we saw the devastating results or outcomes of the absence of truth in one country that calls itself the greatest country in the world. And we saw all over the world, we said, here it is, this country that boasts of the best and most developed democracy in the world, just because of lacking one critical quality, honesty. The country was showing very scary signs of collapse. And I think we have in our own South Africa, the divisions that we see, the factions that we see, how the impact on government is fundamentally because we simply are not committed to honesty.
Thank you so much for speaking to us, Northwest Premier Job Mokgoro. And we will be continuing to receive tributes, of course, so you can share your favorite memory of Jackson Mthembu, whether it's in the public eye, perhaps it's something that would have happened personally that you think the country should share in. Certainly, his death has had an impact on a lot of us. It's come as a shock. We're still processing, but we will pay tribute to his life and works. In other news, mourners who attended the funeral of the late KwaZulu-Natal MEC Ntuli have hailed him as a selfless leader who was dedicated to his work. Ntuli received a Category 1 provincial funeral. The 63-year-old succumbed to COVID-19 complications as well last week. He was laid to rest at Eskaleni Township outside Mpangeni. J.Lee Pauser fired this report.
A befitting send-off to a man who gave 30 years of his life to the KwaZulu-Natal province. Ntuli was born in Mtubatuba in northern KwaZulu-Natal and served as the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Transport and Community Safety in the legislature for more than 10 years. He was also a long-serving member of the Provincial Executive Committee. In 2019, he was appointed MEC. The ANC in the province says his death has left a void.
Yes, he may be an ANC leader, but he understood that his calling was to serve the people of South Africa and the people of KwaZulu-Natal as a whole, without any political exception. And that is what he was doing as the MEC for Transport and Community Safety and Liaison in KwaZulu-Natal. The ANC, therefore, is highly saddened by this occasion, but on the same token, we are celebrating his life, his achievement, his good deeds. He was a leader that was highly capable. He showed us so many skills, and we want to ensure that we take the best out of the leaf of his history.
Ntuli also worked relentlessly in trying to curb the ongoing scourge of taxi violence in the province.
All people of KwaZulu-Natal felt his presence. He has been crisscrossing the province, ensuring that he attend to challenges of road carnage, the accidents. He has been crisscrossing the province, engaging with stakeholders to bring peace within the taxi industry. We will forever be indebted to him for his work.
The family says that Ntuli's sudden death came as a shock, but he has left a lasting legacy.
We did have a discussion with the representatives of government and the hospital to say to them, we think that if in their own opinion she is about to be discharged within the next few days, we think that there should be some arrangement and a permission for her to be allowed to come and pay her last respect to her husband. And of course, for that to happen, we also had to make an arrangements with both doctors within the state and doctors in the private sector who would ensure that her traveling to this occasion and her presence here will not in any way, worsen her situation or her condition.
During the proceedings, there was a public outcry on the attendance of the MEC's wife. She was seen in a state ambulance despite recovering from COVID-19. The family says the decision came from the provincial government and the hospital.
It's very difficult to accept that there would be any vote in the near future to replace him. But of course, we're comforted by the fact that the loss that we've suffered is not only for us as a family, it's also the loss that his movement, the ANC, the people of KwaZulu-Natal and the rest of South Africa have equally suffered. And we are very happy, very indebted to his political home for having come to the family to give us comfort.
The government says that all protocols were followed.
Attending a funeral, observing all the rules is what is important. So he was not inside the hall, and that is it. So in whatever way we can think about it, all the rules were actually observed, and that is what is important.
Ntuli is survived by his wife, 6 children, and 8 grandchildren. J.Lee Pauser, SABC News, in Mpangeni, in KwaZulu-Natal.
And at Care 9
Jackson Mthembu.
Okay, so just tell us a little bit more about his work at the branch level.
Comrade Mthembu played a very, very prominent role in our branch. He used to call us to concertize us, preaching the gospel of unity and accountability. Every time during holidays, when he's home, he used to ask us, he wanted to know about the service delivery in our ward and whether the aged are well taken care of and the masses of our people. He wanted to know about problems concerning the organization, whether are we still at grassroots, we are still mass-based, because ANC believes that we should be grounded, we should work with the people, we should understand the plight of our people, and we should try and engage. Always, when he comes, he used to bring us some T-shirts, blankets for the aged, for our senior citizens, and he worked tirelessly, especially in the province and nationally.
Now, we heard that he was still very much involved in some of those projects that he began as Transport Minister in Mpumalanga at the time. What were some of the things that he at least wanted to extend to the youth to empower them to be able to deal with the challenges of this democracy and the transition?
Remember that Jackson is a red breed, and he left us early to lead in the province, and short after that he went nationally. But every time when he's home, he used to come here and try and bring together the youth, the Women's League, all the leagues of the African National Congress, to try and teach them that they should always be truthful, and whatever they do, whatever task they are given, they should do it precisely, and they must be accountable after that.
Dale Niven, thank you so much for speaking to us. Chairperson of the Mthandazo Ngobeni branch, speaking to us about the passing of Minister Jackson Mthembu, whose branch was near Kanyamazane outside of Bombela in Mpumalanga.
Another senior government official succumbing to the merciless coronavirus. A week ago, the minister made an announcement he had tested positive to COVID-19 after showing some symptoms.
And will obey.
Mthembu was the face of government's communication to the public on matters related to the pandemic. His party, the ANC, says Mthembu has left big shoes to fill. The ANC has expressed shock and sadness at the news of Mthembu's death.
We have lost a really important person in our lives, and we believe that the space that he took will not be able to be filled very easily. We will always love him, and we're going to miss him dearly. And we hope that as we go on in the next couple of days, we will find a way to heal ourselves, but to understand that the real issue here is that we all have to mind the period we are in, and that COVID is not playing with anybody.
Mthembu got involved in politics when the ANC was banned by the apartheid government. He rose through the ranks of being an activist, a legislator in the new dispensation, chief whip of the majority party, and recently a minister in the presidency. Many may remember Mthembu as the ANC spokesperson in what has been described as one of the most difficult times for the party. He steered the party's communication through those times, and today, his comrades say his death is a huge void.
This is a great loss, and we're still reeling from the shock. I think not all of us quite know how to process it yet. We're trying hard. But all we can say is that he leaves a legacy of honesty and integrity, and a legacy of deep value.
And for those he worked with, they say his work ethic was admirable.
To me, he was a mentor that I really looked upon, and at times you would think he's a difficult person, but he would always insist. He would always insist on work being done the right way, the right time, and if it means, as the DSG was saying, staying long hours without before you get everything that was needed done.
Meanwhile, President Ramaphosa says he was deeply saddened to hear about the death of Mthembu. In a statement, the president says Mthembu was an exemplary leader, activist, and a lifelong champion of freedom and democracy. Describing his passing as a great loss to the nation, the president conveyed his condolences to the minister's family, colleagues, and friends. Nhlanhla Khatlhane, SABC News, Johannesburg.
And to talk a little bit more about the life and works of Jackson Mthembu, political analyst Professor Somadoda Figeni joins me now. Described as a youth activist, a community leader, and obviously a government employee, a parliamentarian. What do you most think he should be most remembered for, the roles that he's played? I mentioned quite a few of them, including his leadership in the NEC, Professor Figeni.
Well, I do think that he will be remembered as a committed person who fought against apartheid, who participated in the struggle, but more importantly is the role of being a very simple communicator who did not make enemies even when he disagreed with some of the people. And he became the communications person in the ANC during its most difficult period when factional battles were raw and open. But he managed to work through that. And he again demonstrated the same communication skills during the time when he had to coordinate communication of COVID and the pandemic management from the government side. So those are some of the things that will be remembered for.
I must say, one of the things that also struck me was the warmth which many of his contemporaries, his colleagues from across the floor in the National Assembly spoke about him. Colleagues from all political parties had the same story to tell, how robust he was in the National Assembly, how they differed, but they seem to speak about him with a lot of love and a lot of respect.
That is the essence of Jackson Mthembu's personality. He had the emotional intelligence and the mindfulness of being able to connect with people and be sensitive to their views without making enemies. And he could agree with people as political opponents, but he didn't have toxic relationships. And he was a very personable person, easy to approach, and a simply dignified human being who had a very subtle sense of humor.
One of the things that also has been said on many occasions is that Jackson Mthembu was a patriot. And of course, him being a patriot also led him to be at loggerheads, especially ideologically with some of his comrades within the ANC, the direction which the party is taking as a governing party. Let's look at the significance of some of those principled arguments that he had, those which were public and which also led him to be insulted even personally.
Well, there are instances when he was expressing his discomfort and disapproval with the manner the ANC was taking a detour from its core values, when corruption had become so pandemic and when factional battles had become the main preoccupation. He was openly expressing that within the structures of the ANC, so say the leaders who attended meetings with him, and also outside. And he was open even when some of us analysts were raising issues about some of the rot within the ANC. He would easily admit without being defensive.
What can those who come behind him learn from him? What can the youth learn from him, and even the current generation within the civil service, those who are politicians? He was very frank about what he disagreed on. But I want to talk about his vision, what he thought was most important for us to focus on as a country, and the humility that you speak of, what he was willing to give up.
Well, I do think that most important of what I observed out of him was that even though he had risen in the ranks and he had all the accolades of being a veteran of the struggle, he didn't wear that in his sleeves. He remained a very simple, approachable person, and he was able to laugh at himself. He didn't take himself too seriously, not to be, reached socially. So that in itself, but again, deep down in his heart, he was always worried about the social distance that was beginning to develop between the political class in general and the ANC in particular, and the base and their constituency. And this, he was not acting up this. He expressed these views privately. He expressed them publicly, even when at times they would have limited his career path within the organization itself.
Thank you so much for speaking to us. Political analyst Professor Somadoda Figeni. Tributes continue to pour in, including reactions. We now speak to the ANC's Chief Whip, Doris Lakude. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us. She joins me on the phone. Your memories of the former minister in the presidency and spokesperson of the ANC. If you could just perhaps start with the earliest and why he made an impression on you.
Thank you very much, Tepiso, and good evening to you and the listeners at home. Let me start by correcting one thing. I'm not the chief whip of the ANC Parliament. I'm the deputy
chief whip. Apologies.
Yes. Thank you very much. So what I can say, Sepiso, is that Comrade Jackson Mthembu, I knew him from Mpumalanga, as we are both from Mpumalanga province. He was one of the leaders of our movement in the province. During that time, I know him as a comrade from far, but know him as my leader as well. So he then moved from the legislature to work at Lithuli House as in communication unit. So from there, he was then deployed to Parliament, and he was the chairperson of the Environmental Affairs Portfolio Committee. When Comrade Stone Sizan, who was the chief whip, was then posted to Germany as the ambassador, Comrade Jackson Mthembu was deployed as the chief whip of the majority party in Parliament. So I was there as the deputy chief whip. I worked with him. It was very easy to work with him because I knew him as my leader. I had a great respect for him as my leader, so it was easy to work with him. And given his nature of having this jovial nature, so Comrade Jackson Mthembu, it was easy.
Okay, it was said that one of his most endearing qualities was the fact that he was loyal, but some of the most unsettling ones was just how much he was a stickler for detail, and he was very thorough in his work. What I also found interesting was that he could move from one role to the other with a certain amount of ease. Why do you think that is? Was it because of the principles?
Yes, Comrade Jackson Mthembu was a very principled person. He wouldn't compromise the principles of the ANC for anything. What he was doing was based on what he believed in, and also he defended what he believed in and the principles of the organization. So he was very loyal and very honest member of our organization.
Thank you so much for speaking to us, ANC Deputy Chief of Doris Hlagude. And just looking at that picture of Jackson Mthembu, it seems to have been taken at the election centre, the Rock as it's called, there at the Pretoria Showgrounds. And one of the things that was mentioned earlier on by his colleagues was that he's somebody who was always up at all hours of the night attending to whatever work had to be done. And political parties are also reacting with shock to the news of the passing of Minister Mthembu. Let's hear from them.
It's very hard to comfort people at this particular time, particularly when somebody of this stature and this nature passes. It's difficult to put into words exactly what we feel at this time, but on a personal level, I'm devastated. Yeah. But also on a professional level, I'm deeply saddened because South Africa needs Jackson Mthembu now more than it's ever needed him before. Yeah. And this is a massive blow to the country, and hugely sad to obviously his family and his friends to whom we send condolences, and his colleagues in his own party. But we're all losers as a result of this. This is a man who was a larger-than-life figure and a true patriot who always puts his duties to the country, even often ahead of his own party's interests. And that's a sign of remarkable bravery in somebody in politics.
We send our condolences to the ANC, the organization he comes from. We send our condolences to the people of Emalahleni municipality, to the people of Nkangala district, to the people of Mpumalanga province where he came from. We also want to state that Minister Mthembu was amongst the very few incorruptible leaders in government. He was one of the most dedicated and principled political leaders. He was not always blown by the wind. He always stuck to principle. We are not saying all of these things because Minister Mthembu has passed away. We worked with him very well when he was the chief whip of the majority party, and under his guidance of the ANC Parliamentary Majority Caucus, we were able to build a consensus amongst black political parties to pass a resolution that we must amend Section 25 of the Constitution to allow for expropriation of land without compensation. So amongst his legacies is the fact that South Africa is going to expropriate land without compensation. We say to Minister Mthembu that may your soul rest in perfect peace.
I must say that it is a shock. When I got this message, I could not believe that Minister Jackson Mthembu or Comrade Jackson have passed on. It is a very sad day, not only to his family, but to the entire country. You know, Jackson Mthembu died with his boots on. This man was there for the people of this country. He was a person who loved this country. From before he was appointed as minister, Jackson Mthembu was on the ground. Jackson Mthembu was doing each and everything. The freedom that we enjoy today, his contribution is there. We know, Comrade Jackson Mthembu, how he has worked for the people of this country to be free. It's a very sad day and a great loss to this country. We are very saddened by this.
I want to express on behalf of the Freedom Front Plus our sincere sympathy towards the loved ones and the family of the late Mr. Jackson Mthembu. And you're also correct to say that although we are from different political parties, there's one outstanding feature of Mr. Jackson Mthembu, and that was that it doesn't matter whether he had different political views, he always treated me and my colleagues with friendliness and with respect.
Yeah.
So there was always a mutual respect. Of course, I also want to express my sympathy towards the ANC as a political organization. They've lost a stalwart and a very hard worker in the ANC. The fact that Mr. Jackson Mthembu was also a victim of an armed robbery where he was shot several times.
Yeah.
He survived that. He recovered. And I think where many other people would have retired from politics, Jackson Mthembu came back and he did his work very well. He was also chief whip of the ANC, and I must admit that during his time there was quite order and a good organization under his leadership as the chief whip in Parliament. So it is a loss for the ANC, and it is also a loss for the government of South Africa as far as the pass away of Mr. Jackson Mthembu.
To be honest, I am totally devastated. I just cannot believe that Comrade Jackson is gone. We have been expressing condolences for so many that we've lost in our country day by day since the beginning of this pandemic.
Yeah.
But when it's so close to home,
yeah,
it's absolutely devastating. My deepest sympathies to his family, his children, to his relatives, to the African National Congress, which he served so well.
Yeah.
To South Africa, he gave his working life, his youth, his commitment to our country, to the struggle for freedom from a school boy right through to his adulthood and even up to today.
Yeah.
What a loss. What a loss. I can't believe it, really.
Yeah. Minister, I can see you're actually very emotional, and I'll try to be as brief as I possibly can. I mean, maybe you can talk to us about, your past in terms of working with him and how closely you worked together. I mean, from where we're sitting as the media, you're just, fellow ministers representing the same party, but for you is deeper than that. I can see you actually crying, and it's the first time I've seen you, Minister, crying. I mean, it's really quite sad and touching indeed, Minister. Again, I'm so sorry. But yeah, you know, talk to us about your past, the kind of relationship that the two of you had.
I think, Flo, that everybody who knew Comrade Jackson is probably feeling as I'm feeling at this moment. You know, he was a larger-than-life person. His presence in the ANC was just so, tremendous. As spokesperson of the ANC, I think the rapport that he had with the media, the manner in which he was able to present the conclusions, decisions, and perspectives of the African National Congress was par excellence. So I think, this is a great loss. I know him and have known him as a comrade. We sat in close benches, close to each other in Parliament. We shared many moments, serious moments, moments of laughter. So, this is, for me, it's a comrade and a friend, a colleague. We worked closely together in preparation in 2019 for the United Nations General Assembly, where he played a very, very critical role in representing South Africa with respect to monitoring and action on the Sustainable Development Goals, and presented our report and the work South Africa is and had done up to that point on implementing the Sustainable Development Goals.
The IFP extends its most sincere condolences to the Mthembu family, President Ramaphosa, and the government and the people of South Africa, and the ANC on the passing of Minister Jackson Mthembu due to COVID-19. Minister Mthembu was a patriot who loved this country and dedicated his life to its service. He enjoyed the respect of all of us across the political spectrum, for indeed he too was a man who respected everybody who crossed his path. He was a hard worker and he was a bridge builder. During the very difficult times and tumultuous periods of Parliament when he was Chief Whip, he was able to carry Parliament on his shoulders and build a consensus which allowed the business of the people to carry on largely uninterrupted. He distinguished himself when he was the minister in the presidency and had an open door policy and was readily available to all that needed the assistance of that office. This kind of patriotic duty on his part has been the hallmark of his life. During this difficult time, our thoughts and prayers are mostly reserved for his family, who have suffered the biggest blow because of his passing. Minister Mthembu was a patriot. He was somebody whom could be relied upon with the business of the people. He was full of life, and whilst he was a very jocular character, he was also a very serious individual who understood that the business of the people required of all of us to put shoulder to the wheel. And so his passing is most certainly tragic, and one which we in the IFP feel just as much as all those in South Africa feel. May he now rest in eternal peace, and we thank him for his service, and we thank him for his patriotism, and we thank him for being a bridge builder, a reconciliation agent, and somebody who was always committed to a healthy and thriving democracy where all voices were listened to and where all voices were heard. Rest in peace, Mvelase.
Including my daughter and her friends. Her name is Tuli. She's up there. Now, I just want to say to Tuli, if you see anybody wearing a red overall and boots approaching you, run, my girl. Run and don't look back. As we deliver this budget vote speech on the eve of Mandela.
Tuli. Honorable Ndlozi. I'm just greeting Tuli. No, Honorable Ndlozi, that is completely out of order. Tuli. Honorable Ndlozi, that's completely...
Including my daughter and her friends. Her name is Tuli. She's up there.
In memory of Jackson Mthembu. Light moments, there was some strong-worded rebukes to his colleagues in some instances, and within the party, always straightforward and direct. A party that has celebrated him for his loyalty and consistency, especially when it comes to his principles and values and defending those of the party. We've been asking you what some of your fondest memories are. We've had various political parties that have also been reacting to the death of Jackson Mthembu. So please do share with us. Let's go to some of those tweets. Disang writing in this evening to say he was very brave, straight and forward kind of a person. I remember one evening before the president delivered his speech, one journalist asked him, Mr. Mthembu, what do you think the president will tell the nation tonight? He laughed and said, I can't answer you on that. Disang writing from Daung, and I think there are many journalists who can share their experiences with Jackson Mthembu. This one from NVME saying Jackson Mthembu was my favorite minister. He was simple, a great speaker. He will be surely missed. A huge loss for South Africa. Indeed, I think many South Africans are saying that. It's been a very difficult one this Thursday, processing that news. Many of you are reflecting that on various platforms. Mabato Ratema also writing in this evening to say, I remember him introducing himself as the mouthpiece of the ANC. I think he was a spokesperson of the ANC by then. May his soul rest in peace. Indeed, Mabato, he served many years as the spokesperson of the ANC, also serving under former President Nelson Mandela in that role. Say so this evening, saying, I recall him as the coolest minister. He had such an incredible sense of humor. I just loved how friendly and respecting he was towards journalists. May his soul rest in peace. And indeed, say so he could laugh loudly in 1 minute and also tell you off in the next, but always true to the core of who he is, as was said by his colleagues earlier on. What you see is what you get. I certainly always remembered that about Jackson Mthembu, never too shy to speak the truth to anyone, as it's been said by many people as well, irrespective of whether it was his boss. And serving the people of South Africa was top of his list, and we salute him for that's exactly how he passed on, serving the people of South Africa, and by something that he fought very hard to protect the rest of us from COVID-19. Remember, you can share with us your thoughts. You can view any of our interviews or features by going to sabcnews.com. The life, works and times of Jackson Mthembu is what we are celebrating today. Now, moving on to other news. Action on the passing of the Minister in the Presidency, Jackson Mthembu, were joined by the ANC's head of organising and NEC member, Nomvula Mkonyane. Very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Condolences to you, your colleagues as well. When was the last time you spoke to him, and does this news come as a surprise to you?
Good evening, and good evening to the listeners. And condolences to Jackson's family, to all comrades and every South African that has crossed paths with Jackson. The news came as a surprise. Myself and Jackson last spoke in a Zoom meeting, convened by the President a week ago. And he called me Vulaki, I call him Seki. We also knew that he was hospitalized, and we kept checking with us on that communication strategy group. And when we all wished him well, he actually came back just last week to say thank you very much for your prayer. And getting the news coming from Luthuli House through Comrade Stacey, our DSP, one just felt that our faith has shaken, our hearts that turn apart, that we lose those that are close to us. We no longer talk about numbers. We talk about people that we have grown together with. I've grown up with Jackson in the United Democratic Front. When we came here in the Transvaal, coming from Eastern Transvaal to Southern Transvaal, working together in the detainees support group. Myself, him, Comrade Brian Songwa, Comrade Before Peters, Comrade Conisio Posini, Comrade Joe from Tembisa were all coordinators working under the leadership of Audrey Coleman in the detainee support group. We've shared so much common with Jackson, both in our families, in the movement. Our differences never made us to be enemies. I will definitely lose somebody you can trust on executing an ANC task. He was a reliable deployee wherever he was deployed. Very energetic. But this time the invisible enemy defeated him.
Let's talk about some of the things that you will miss. A lot of people have agreed on the kind of person that he is, mild-mannered, of humility. But one of the things that I know is that he was quite surprising. He was unpredictable, if you will, especially in incidents where it's said that he was also always ready for a good laugh at a good party. What do you remember of that?
Yeah, there was a normal human being in Jackson's life. He had a very strong laughter that would actually engulf everybody who's laughing, and your own laughter will never be heard. But he also was somebody who was very caring. He called me Vulaki. That's the only person, I don't know how, but he called me Vulaki, and always hugging, always in a jovial mood, even in the midst of a heated difference. The other thing I will remember, Jackson, upon coming to Southern Transvaal, myself and Brian took him to Kamakoko, downtown in Johannesburg, where we used to eat our pap and T-bone steak with chili tomato sauce. And at that time, he loved these breadwoods. And even now, we used to mock him and say, Jackson, you must outgrow the breadwoods that were introduced to by us in the Southern Transvaal. Now people are wearing body sheets and stuff, but Jackson invested on his breadwoods. And he was very comfortable with his dress sense, because he would say, Makoya, we so I need somebody who will be like that. How are you, Vulaki? We battled with our kids who are on substance abuse, and that brought our families together. All because of our time that we have spent serving the people of South Africa, getting targeted by those who are dealing with drugs and hitting us where it matters most on our children.
I want to talk about that incident in particular. He did what many politicians, especially in the public eye, wouldn't do. He was very open. He shared very raw emotions about how difficult a time it was, and it would happen with his children when he was going through that. He would mirror that to South Africa at large. What lessons can you and your colleagues, all of us, learn from that, and how do we make South Africa a better place? Just that making a frailty into a source of strength.
So, we belong to the same family group. Two, I introduced him to one, which is a Catholic families group, because he was also a staunch Catholic, something common that we also share. It is because of the support and the experience we get exposed to, not as public representatives, but as parents and South Africans, that we were able to say, let us be the ones who must speak out on this thing, so that society must know that they are not alone, that we will never discard or disown our children. And that was the most difficult journey we have traveled together with Comrade Jackson. I'll really miss him on that side. And I think when we go through these kind of things, sometimes people think it's because we are irresponsible parents. No, it is not. We become casualties of those who want to undermine our own contribution, and they will hit you hard. You can try and do everything on your child, trying to save your child. But
thank you so much for speaking to us, former Water and Sanitation Minister Nomvula Mkonyane, who worked very closely with Jackson Mthembu. Will continue to get more reactions. You send in yours. We're asking you as our question of the day, what are the final moments that you remember of the man? So please do share that with us.